Before we get to our exciting panel that will explore transformation in the evolving life sciences industry, moderated by John Nosta of Nosta Lab, and featuring Sharon Callahan from TBWA, don't pay attention to the men behind me, World Health, Patrick Lindsay from United Biosource Corporation, Wendy White, and Dr. Ben Wigand from Janssen R&D, I'd like to introduce 2018 PharmaVOICE 100 Dr. Georgia Mitzi from Sunovion, the diamond sponsor of our executive forum. Georgia is a dynamic and passionate leader. She heads Sunovion's global digital health transformation. She is future-focused and is building the bridges to connect Sunovion with different key stakeholders in new ways and strengthen the very important relationship between patients and doctors. Georgia is collaborative, innovative, and having had the pleasure of getting to know her over the past year, it's no surprise she's a 2018 honoree. Like Georgia, Sunovion has been a great collaborator with us over the years. We've had the honor of recognizing several of their executives, including Dr. Ken Koblin in 2018 and Tom Hospiter in 2015. They're here with us this evening as well. We thank Sunovion again for their ongoing support. Please join me in welcoming Georgia to the stage.
Thank you so much, Sharon. So I'm honored to be here today, and on behalf of all of us at Sunovion, I'd like to express how thrilled we are at this year's PharmaVOICE 100 celebration and to support this important industry event. Thank you, Taryn and PharmaVOICE, for your recognized leadership. PharmaVOICE has been in business for more than 15 years, just celebrated their 17th anniversary. Thank you also for creating this night of magic for several years. This year, you managed to have a room full of inspiring people. But do you know what else I see? I see a room full of hope and love. Because only when you love what you do, you can inspire. And when you can inspire, there is a possibility to exceed everybody's expectation and achieve the impossible. That is transformation. But it's also a room of responsibility, and in many ways, the beginning of a great journey, because our work has just started. Now it is our responsibility to create more inspiring people and weave the threads of possibility so our collective efforts can lead to even greater transformation. Like many of you here, Sunovion has also embarked on a journey of transformation in our endeavors to develop new medicines, identify new ways to connect with patients and their families, and help them enjoy a better quality of life. In my area of focus at Sunovion, I'm trying to advance digital healthcare initiatives, and my focus is very clear. Technology is not a panacea, and while technology is still rapidly evolving, the focus should be on the how and not on the type of the technology. When I'm thinking about the digital healthcare initiatives, I have three hows in my mind. First, how can we protect people from getting sick? Prevention. Second, how can we improve people's healthcare experience, diagnosis? And three, how we can better support people and their families during the most challenging periods of their lives, monitoring. Whenever I think, though, about the challenges of transformation, I try to remind myself a great quote. I'm paraphrasing a bit. To be happy in life, you really need three things: something to do, something to love, and something to look forward to. I think that we can all agree, since we have found something to do which happens to be something we love, we will continue contributing and so much looking forward to transforming the current ways for clinical development and delivery of healthcare for current and future generations. And now, I would like to hand over to the experienced hands of Executive Panel Moderator John Nosta, founder of the Nosta Lab, whom I had finally the chance to meet face-to-face at the CNS Summit last year after following him for many, many years at Twitter. He followed me back. So John will facilitate tonight a panel on the topic of transformation in the evolving life sciences industry. And please join me in welcoming the panel to the stage. So thank you, and let's make this night memorable.
I can't resist standing in front of a microphone and not saying something. Look how far we've come. Look, first of all, I want to declare myself as the uncle of PharmaVOICE because I was there the day it was born. I remember it. I'm sure many people in the room remember that beautifully designed piece of communication that captured our imagination. That was transformational. That was transformation. And as I look out into the audience, I see so many friends. I mean, my heart is pounding, my mind is spinning. Amir and Beth and my friends from the agency side, from the pharmaceutical side. Look how far we've come in 17 years. You know, when you look back at the year 2000, I would argue that basically nothing happened. Well, Y2K might have not happened. But we really see the beginning of our century starting with an inflection point around 2007, and that was the development of the smartphone. But we're seeing things now that are transformational and driving change from a multifactorial perspective. The first of which is the level of strife we see in the world today. Look anywhere. Look at any topic, any area. Political, but even clinical. Our population is aging. Dementia is emerging. We're getting overweight, the emergence of type 2 diabetes. There are real issues around strife. Secondly, we're seeing a profound technological revolution. Tech is changing the world, and simultaneously, tech is also instilling a sense of wonder in our lives, a sense of wonder. And that in of itself is transformational. And finally, we're seeing a sense of individual empowerment. You, me, a clinician, a patient, a mom with an ill child. So these things are coming together, and they're pushing us in new and exciting directions. I'm not sure, as I look to the panel, if I know where those directions are, but I think that's the premise today, is what is transformation? How can we define it? How can we learn from our experiences? And how can we traverse this human inflection point that is changing reality? So my challenge to the panel today, as I sit down, was to introduce yourself with a word or a phrase, something that kind of defines you in the context of transformation and innovation. So Sharon, let's kick it off with you.
Raise hell.
Raise hell. Okay. Patrick, what's your...
Unsettled, never satisfied.
That's interesting, because unsettled is also sort of kind of changing, right? You're sort of amorphous in that sense.
Yeah, you know, the reality that I've faced too many, whether it be my own employees or my family or friends, that are all navigating a very difficult healthcare environment every day.
Is it just a healthcare environment that's difficult?
It's not, but it's the one I wake up thinking about all the time.
Interesting. Ben.
Relentless optimist. I think transformation is difficult. There's a lot of challenges from every side. And if you don't have that constant belief that the next hurdle is going to be solved, it's really hard to do it. And so there's a relentless optimism about what we do, myself, our team, what we believe at Johnson & Johnson.
Interesting. I'm gonna challenge you. My friends at Ogilvy taught me that you have to have single-minded positioning, like Volvo. Pick one of those two. What's more important, to be relentless, which is sort of the driven, or to be more optimistic, which is more of a state of mind? One's functional, one's more ethereal. I'm curious as to your thoughts on that.
I think we have to be driven to get to the end of the day. I mean, there's going to be barriers that we're going to have to work our way through. I think optimism is the vision of where you're headed. Relentless is the way to get there.
Wendy.
I would say purpose and courage. And if you made me pick one, it would be purpose. But I think that all of us together, authentically thinking about what is best for patients, that is what we have to keep as our well, should I say lodestar? I guess that'll be a problem. as our focus. How about that? As our focus, and that when we do that, that money follows, all the other things follow. And it could be, and by having the courage to really do that, whether people have done it before or not, that authentically thinking about what's the best thing that we should be doing.
I have a hierarchy of questions, and I'm going to jump around because I think what you're saying is so important and resonant. Recently, it's been said that culture squashes innovation, that the ability of employees, rank and file, from brand managers to research scientists, to have that sense of optimism, to be driven, to use all those words that we've just articulated here is very valuable. And I'm curious about that juxtaposition to, let's say, management, the installation of management and being driven. Could you comment on that, on the power of motivating people who kind of do the work day in and day out? Anybody? Go ahead, Wendy.
Well, I mean, it comes back to purpose. I mean, what better job can you have than making people healthier, than helping people, helping families in what is, as you pointed out, what is some of the most painful parts of their lives. I mean, if you just really keep that, thinking about that, and you're coming to work every day, whatever part of the spectrum you're in, of the process of, I'm going to do my best because this is going to help patients, I think that makes a tremendous difference in your culture.
Yes.
The thing I'd build on what Wendy says, I think as we're going forward, I think the problems we have are becoming bigger and bigger in a good way. And what that means is that, you know, I think one was mentioned during one of the invitations, or talking about one of the panelists. Think about consumer insights. You know, when you think about the future, if you could create the ideal future, right? I believe, if I ask anybody in this room, nobody wants to see a doctor. No one wants to be sick. We all would like to be healthy. We like to stay healthy as long as we can. And then, to your point, to do that, it's going to take people from all different places. It takes about, you know, I heard about digital therapeutics and how do you engage people through digital means, like iPhone, etc. Diagnostics, monitoring. And so I think giving this vision of where we want to go and having a big enough vision actually brings a lot of people along. And I think that's the thing that today what we're trying to solve is so big, we need everybody. And I think if we can, you know, today we live in a world that tries to polarize. I think healthcare is the place that we can actually bring people together and work together. And it's a big enough problem that there's enough value for all of us to solve, right? Which is very different than before. If you're trying to say, I'm trying to solve a smaller problem where it's harder to slice it up. Trying to solve healthcare actually invites, I believe, all different types of people from different backgrounds, different experiences to solve this big problem.
I think,
Sure.
Sorry. I think my view is it's hard because transformation gets stifled by the P&L. And typically, the brilliant ideas kind of swash around in organizations too often. And finally, at points when someone at leadership realizes they've been challenged on their growth numbers, they're challenged on their P&L numbers or whatever, they may listen, at which point it opens the door one more time. So I think we have to be, you know, realistic in the sense that large corporations are struggling with the innovation because the dominance of financials and what that requires, quote unquote, stakeholders, who, by the way, is all of us, because fundamentally we're the ones buying these stocks and, you know, and so on and so forth. It just creates a struggle that I see every day. And I find that smaller organizations that have to strap their boots on and make something innovative happen are actually the ones that are driving us forward faster and quicker than large corporations that, you know, are being dominated by their P&Ls.
Interesting. Sharon, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think when you say that culture is squashing innovation, I think we all know the kinds of companies where culture does squash innovation. But that's why I said raise hell, because you're not going to be able to be innovative in those companies unless it really starts at the top with leadership, right? And you have to have a vision, and you really have to push the change. And we see it happening, but very rarely in large companies. And I agree with you. You know, I see a range of clients from big pharma to, small startups, and you see sort of a different kind of passion, not really driven by the P&L, but driven by what's possible.
So let me ask a question. Is pharma cool? Simple question. Is pharma cool? Cool. C-O-O-L. Hip. With it. Fun. Do kids want to go work in pharma when they graduate college?
I don't.
Actually, sorry.
A very serious question.
Answer first. No.
I have to say, I think some of these pharma companies in Boston are really cool.
I agree.
And San Francisco.
Come on.
San Francisco
good.
also, yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of cool companies, not the old established companies, but some of these emerging companies. They have cool products, they have cool people, they have cool cultures.
See, and for me, and this again is my personal observation, that I think that pharma has lost its groove.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that. I think because it's not monolithic. That's the issue, right? You say pharma, but I agree here, because if you separate it and you go into the innovative organization, call them biotech, call them mid-cap, call them small-cap, whatever you want to call them, San Francisco area, Boston area, and others, there are really some serious work being done and great results being produced.
There's
and when you walk into those firms,
big pharma and immuno-oncology.
well, I'm just telling you, when you walk into those firms, you're just part of the solution. When you walk into big pharma as a service provider, you're more vendor, and I think that's when the walls go up and you're not being as creative as they can possibly be.
So I think that speaks to transformation, and if companies want to transform, if they are motivated to transform, and I still say this, I think that the coolest things that are happening in science, and I believe we are in the era of science now, this next 100 years is the human era, where we'll see aspects of life extension and life expansion, and that pharma is the cool place to be.
Yep.
I just don't, people want to work at Google, or people want to work at other places. I'm just curious about that is there some sort of psychopathology behind pharma that is problematic?
So I would say two things, John. I think a lot of times there's labels that get put on, and as you've heard, you hear bits and pieces. If you sort of peel back the onion where those pieces have come from, you see key problems that they're trying to solve that are exciting to anybody. And I would argue some of the biggest problems we have to solve, and I think that's why it's amazing how many people are here and there's overflow, et cetera, is because healthcare is a big problem. I don't look at myself saying I work for Johnson & Johnson as a pharma company. I look at we're the world's comprehensive healthcare company, because 2 years ago when I got a phone call that a dear friend had a heart attack and I went to visit them, they didn't say, was it a pharma, was it a device, whatever. They just wanted a healthcare solution, and wherever it came from, they wanted their lives to be changed. And I think that's what we can bring. But they also said is, what could I have done to prevent it, right? And how do I get ahead of the disease? And we heard, a number of people already talk about the concept of prevention or interception. I think those are the places that we're trying to go. And I think today, with the technologies that allow us to do that, there's a lot of cool things out there that just never existed before when that you didn't have the ability. So I actually think we're in the place. Healthcare is in this place of one of the most coolest places people can be.
I agree. And I think that the coolness of the products, you mentioned immuno-oncology. Think about CAR T. That's not someone mentioned it before. Is it a product? Is it a process? Is it a device? Just the products that we have to deal with are going to make people reinvent things. Because if they don't, then they're not going to get to the people who need them.
So let me just say that in the rare disease space where I work, there are 30 million people. It's 7,000 different diseases, and only 5% have on-label therapies. So there's this juxtaposition of all this data. We're figuring out the genome. By the way, Google getting into healthcare. So I mean, there's all those lines are blurring, and we have the combination of lots and lots of data. Lots of social interaction where people can come together and do things faster, and enormous unmet need. And those things together, I think, whether it's cool or not, it's needed. And I think that the science is amazing, just as you said, like the next 100 years. This is where you can make an enormous difference. If you're a scientist, you can actually go in and you can figure things out, and I think that's exciting.
So how do we define transformation? We had a little phone call, and this
Yeah.
kind of, because it just seems like it's another one of these ambiguous terms that could be barked by Wall Street, by the C-suite, by whomever. And in the context of the life science industry, when we talk about transformation, what are we trying to do abstractly? And I'm going to drill down a little deeper. How would you define it? What are we trying to transform? Is it the business model? Our core values?
Well, given all the change, I'm just going to follow on
Yeah,
with
sure.
that.
Go jump right in.
So given the fact that our life has changed, the healthcare, so in addition to all the data and the genetics and the social media, our healthcare system has changed, and that's putting enormous pressure in thinking and optimism, as you pointed out, and optimism. And the old model where we're thinking of ourselves as manufacturers and making products just doesn't meet the new paradigm. And people want to step in. They have, again, big unmet needs, and they're going to figure out, how do I use all these new tools that I have available, and how do I figure it out? And by the way, if you're not going to help me, I'm doing it myself. Right? So we have rare disease parents who are starting companies. We have public benefit corporations in California who are doing
Well, let me
discovery, all
interrupt you
sorts
on
of
that,
stuff.
because I
Sorry.
want to. So is one of the levels or one of the areas of transformation the shift from control to collaboration? Is it a collaborative environment? Does that define one aspect? Because I'm trying to sort of silo this a little bit so we get around it. I think that's what you were alluding to.
Yeah, I do think. Well, I hope so. That's maybe an optimistic viewpoint, but that in order for us to, and I think you mentioned that too, right? In order for us to actually look at the problem, that it's going to require lots of people from different places to collaborate to solve it.
Or to think about it in a different way, to kind of disrupt it, right?
Yeah.
Because people share things
Yeah.
now. Airbnb, you share
Yeah.
your home. Uber, you share rides. We're not there yet. And what does that look like? What if everybody shared data? What if everyone shared intellectual property? What kind of breakthroughs could there be then? And that has to come, right? Because no one can keep affording to do it on their own.
That's happening now. There's a company represented in the audience here, Amicus Therapeutics. They bought a therapy for EB, and I'm not going to, epidermolysa bullosa. I probably didn't say that quite right. Close.
Got it?
Terrible, terrible skin disease. There's no therapy. So they got it to phase 3. It didn't work. And they have now done 2 case studies on it. They will talk to any of their competitors. They'll walk them through all the clinical trials. That's the kind of collaboration that's transformative.
Ben, you wanted to
I'm
jump
just going
in.
to build a little bit. I mean, so the thing, when you help with the definitions, a lot of times I like to think of other areas that have transformed. And I go back, and I'm probably older than the majority of people in the room, but when we were growing up, we would turn the radio on, and they would tell us, the disc jockey would say, sometime this hour I'm going to play this song, right? And you would put up with 45 minutes of terrible music to listen to the one song you wanted, right? We can understand. We relate to that, and our kids look at you like, Dad, what were you thinking about, or grandparent, whatever.
Okay.
But to be fair, so what happened, the songs that were played were generally developed, right? Today, we still have a lot of healthcare that is for the masses, but it's not for the individual, right? None of us would listen to bad music. I would challenge us today is, how good is our healthcare could be? So how personalized is it? What are the experiences that we have as good as they possibly can? And we know when it's transformed because we don't operate with music that way. We don't operate with restaurants that way. We don't operate with a lot of things that way. Those transformations should be coming into the healthcare environment. And I think you're seeing bits and pieces of that, but it takes a lot of things to integrate together and a visionary lead to sort of pull it.
So,
I was just
go
going to
ahead,
say,
sure.
I think we're ways away from transformation in the pharmaceutical industry. And I always compare a lot of things to music. Some of you know I have a music background. The reality of the music industry being truly disrupted came down to large corporations which controlled the finances, figuring out how are they going to monetize their business in a new world, i.e., how am I going to make money? So large pharma is trying to figure it out. because the models of revenue in the music business is totally different than it was before. Okay, and they're not making any less money. If you look at the industry, it's actually outgrown where it was when the MP3 arrived and they were trying to squash it. It's way past that today because new models, revenue models have come in. And so if pharma at the large pharma base will have to work through what that new model will look like. How am I going to make money going forward? Because if the new big, i.e. is a lot of rare diseases, i.e. small, you may only have 200,000 patients, period. You're not going to have scripts written in a way that ends up with a $16 billion a year drug. You're just not going to have that. So they have to move to these new models. And the more they move to these new models and adopt them is the more they're going to be more open for this innovation that we're talking about. And I believe that smaller companies are actually hanging on to their products. They're not just up-licensing them like they used to. Okay, so that's going to shift. That's where the real shift is coming in terms of transforming the pharmaceutical industry. And I think folks that are running these very neat, very cool companies that are addressing these issues, true unmet medical needs, and addressing patient lives and improving patient lives is what's going to dominate and going to force large pharma to kind of make different decisions in how they're.
But interestingly, there are few and far between IPOs in the life science industry, particularly in digital health. In the digital health side, there were zero IPOs in 2017. There was one IPO, a vagal nerve stimulation company that went public. Is the nature of innovation such that it's built upon a consolidation where pharma is the clinical validation and the market access and the lightning comes from somewhere else? Is that a methodology that seems to resonate with you folks? Well, they've got the money, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a good idea.
And the worldwide distribution, right?
Yeah.
Well, again,
Yeah.
pharma has
Right.
drug development and consumer access. And I find that most small companies live under the basic strategy that build it and they will come. And they're very surprised when nobody shows up at their door to buy their product. I want to go back. Okay, go ahead. Come on.
I actually don't agree with that.
Good.
I
love it when you don't agree.
I
This is
totally
perfect.
don't agree with that, that build it and they will come. No, we know that doesn't work.
No, that's false.
Right, that's false.
Right.
But you can build it, and because we have the internet and we have all these different connections, and people are already connected, if you can personally target the people who most need that, and they will all talk to each other, and they will, in fact, get there. You don't have to do it.
That's a go-to-market strategy, right? That's not build it and they will come.
Right.
I want to go
Exactly.
back to something else, which you guys touched on, which I find very interesting. The difference between innovation, the I word, and implementation. Because everybody talks about Uber, right? That's sort of the prototypical disruptor. Uber did nothing new except assemble existing technologies. And I'm curious, is that part of what pharma isn't doing? I use telemedicine as an example in
Yeah,
healthcare.
I think what Uber did was decide what to innovate, and then they implemented it pretty well. And I'm not sure that pharma is picking the right things to innovate.
So I want to kind of stay on that because I think that is a salient issue here, because innovation has to be across the timeline. You have to pick where and what. And I think that we often thrust the notion of innovation and transformation to our teams, to our employees, without defining it or even telling them where. Maybe the best spot for innovation is trial recruitment through social media. Maybe that's the spot where we should push, right? And then, and don't worry about, another area, this sort of open innovation. I'm curious, how do we time it, place it? How do you manage innovation and transformation? Any experiences?
So again, I think a couple things, and I would say innovation happens across, as you said, across the entire life cycle, and I think it has to be there to be ultimately successful. We have seen too many very
But is it
rarely.
equally distributed?
I think it's distributed at different places, and so it goes back to say, why do you have to have a collaboration, a group of people working together? Because what you see at times is people with really good ideas that can't figure out how to run the clinical trial quick enough, and so someone else has a similar idea, runs it faster, and they get ahead. And so great ideas, when you're the fast follower or the third line, is not going to capture, is not going to be implemented in the maximum way. I do think, again, I like to take a step back and say, what are the problems we're trying to solve? And when we solve those problems, in the most innovative way, they have to be implemented. Innovation is not just an idea in the lab. Innovation is when it actually makes a difference in individuals' lives, or in a system's life, or in a healthcare payers, providers' life. So I think you put all those things together, and I think you have to innovate all the way across. And the company who can see that, and today, if you go back 2000. 17 years ago, I think you had a lot of people trying to solve things by themselves. Today, we don't. I would argue we see much more collaboration
Patrick,
across the way.
I agree with you. Yet on the other side, I remember a presidential campaign a few years ago when we were talking about the energy policy, and one candidate was quick to say, "My strategy is all of the above." That's meaningless.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to wash my car, I'm going to get a hose and a sponge and soap. I'm not going to take out all my cleaning tools. And I'm curious if there's something. Go ahead, Wendy. I see you're kind of
I'm
jumping
ready.
at this.
I'm ready. Well, because I like what you said before, that if we think about innovation as collaboration, and what it makes me think about is a really interesting innovation. Well, first of all, let me just say that in the rare disease space, this is just one of my guiding principles, is that innovation happens at the margins. And when you have parents who are pushed to the edge because they have sick children, what wouldn't you do for your child? And that drives innovation. So one of the really cool companies that I think is doing amazing innovation that's a little bit makes me think of Uber is a company called Prolara. Does anybody know Ethan Perlstein out here?
No.
Yeah. So Ethan Perlstein started a lab, and he did a public benefit corporation, and he's from Stanford and Harvard and like whatever, and he he's got all kinds of incredible degrees, and he couldn't get a job, so he starts his own discovery public benefit corporation, and then he says, here's what I'm going to do. We share genetic material with 75% of our genetic material with like worms. So I think we can do much cheaper discovery, early discovery, if we just do a whole bunch of work with worms. And here's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna do Pearl Quests. So he made it all on his website, really open. And he said, if you're a patient group, which would mean it would be easier to drive clinical trials and cheaper, and you can raise $100,000, $150,000, he can hire a postdoc, and I'll do discovery for you and get it to the next stage. And he's got like 7 different Pearl Quests going.
Let's move it around. The quote of the day so far for me is innovation happens on the fringes.
Yeah.
More to come on that.
So part of it is that when we do these comparisons and transformation, there's a huge difference in all these other industries. And the issue is that there is a consumer that's actually making a decision. In the pharma industry, they're focused on CMS. They're focused on these large payers, okay? That's their guiding principle for the most part, because that's who is actually going to give them the money. The foundations that are actually getting more and more and more, solid, are actually enabling the patient voice to be closer to the money, right? And the more the patient voice gets close to that decision making, is the more transformation is going to happen. It's not happening right now because you can say Uber, but it's one guy and he pays. Not going to some big behemoth, company that's going to do all the payments. And because we're in this global industry that's very different, you go outside the country, it's different than here. But because the payer voices are now speaking up and saying, hey, I'm not going to reimburse for this drug unless it's working. The foundations are actually now, patient voices are stronger and they're getting a louder voice because the foundations, all of a sudden pharma is respecting and loving these foundations because the voice of the patients is what's going to drive the transformation. So that's what we're going to have to
I want you to hold that thought because I'm going to utter the words that I hate to say in a minute. But the notion of innovation on the fringes, I wonder if pharma is good at that. If, in fact, it is complacent and seeks more of an intellectual average than pushing people to new thinking, I wonder if there's a sense of complacency about making your numbers. Look, I'm in my job for 6 months or a year because I'm going to get another job. Is that real or is that just sort of an artifact?
So again, I feel obligated.
I love that. I love the head shake. I love the head shake. That was great.
Right. If you look at our credo, which we live at J&J every day, right? Our first commitment and our focus is on the patients,
Yes.
right? And then it's to the communities, and it's to the doctors, and then to the communities. And we believe fundamentally If we do all those things, the shareholders will receive a fair profit. And that's the way it has to be. And so if you focus there on value, I would argue at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that happen that look nice, but if they're not driving in meeting consumer needs or consumer insights and making a meaningful difference, there's a lot of things that we see today because of big data that you can see statistical differences, but they're not clinically different. There are things that you can see that make you feel really good about yourself, but if they're not going to change the standard of care, I would argue they're not a transformational innovation. And that's what we're trying to do. Just like you change the standard of care, how you listen to music or how you did other things, we hold ourselves to a higher standard.
I completely
So I don't think we're complacent at all.
And I still think that Big Pharma is coming out with some amazing innovations. And, you know, the R&D area is not innovative in Big Pharma.
No, that's fair. But I also think that back to your money question, I mean, what we're seeing in small corporations is, or even in patients, is that they're actually asking for money back, right? I will fund you. I want a seat at the table, and I will, you know, and I will determine what value is to me, and I want a piece of that. It's not just. It's interesting. It's an interesting conundrum, right? Because
I just wonder if
Yeah.
people do want to change. And this is just my individual observation, that they live in silos. They are not rocking the boat. They're getting their ticket punched. And as much as these are catchphrase things, now, that has nothing to do with patient centricity and the credo and all that kind of stuff. But I'm curious, does pharma want to change from the inside out? And it's just a fundamental transformative question. I want you to say yes.
Yeah. Again, just for the record, I've never heard credo and all of their stuff put in the same sentence before, so it's hard for me to sort of deal with. But I'll get past that. But that's just my own values that I have to work through. But seriously, I think what we're trying to do at J&J, and I think a lot of other pharma are trying to do, is we envision a world where pharma doesn't exist. Right? If you don't have patients and you only have healthy people, there is no one to sell pharma drugs to. So that's the world that we're trying to build to, which I think is very, very transformative. Now, look, we have to continue to meet the needs of where you're at as you go through. So I think that as long as we keep the consumer in mind and the unmet needs, I think we're going to get there. And I think there's a lot of. It's not just a J&J. There's a number of our fellow farm companies that I think are making some very meaningful differences.
Personally, I just find that as we ladder feature, benefit, value up to consumer centricity, where everything we do is for the patient, it becomes extraordinarily undifferentiated for me. And I think that pharma should be patient infused. But you know, it's finding an off-the-shelf CAR T is transformative. Making it delivered nice is okay, but to me, that's the magic of pharma. Allogeneic versus autologous CAR T platform. Wow. You want to change the world, you want to be transformative. And I think sometimes we miss that by hiding behind slogans. And it just.
Well, I think that's fair, but I also think that the reality is if Big Pharma isn't moving fast enough, people are just going to go around them. They have that ability now, and we see that already happening. So, I mean, I think innovation is going to get driven. You're absolutely right, though, in terms of the science, like the CAR T, but that's back to collaboration. To me, it's like that unmet need and the absolute drive, and if patients are not patient, then they're going to make it happen.
That's fair. I want to just do some touch points of transformation and see how you respond to this. Data, big data. How does that, as a commodity, play into the evolution and transformation of life science?
We're really in an era where we're going from we think to we know. Big data provides a lot of certainty about the decisions that we make early on. We're not just measuring the impact of the decisions we made before. So I really think that big data should be able to transform everything.
No, I agree. I mean, we've done, we're pulling data streams together from the EMRs to, claims data, to medical claims. We're pulling it all together on humans all the time, every day. And that's how we're helping to inform pharma as to helping them with the direction that they should be taking.
So would you say that's one of the
Except for J&J.
Ben, I mean, when you talk about big data as a tool or a key point of innovation, yes, I'm getting heads nodding on the other side.
I think it's everywhere. It's from learning about what consumers need. It's predicting things that are going to happen. It's about showing efficacy of what's working, what's not working. I think the data platforms that we saw useful in a number of these musical transformations will be very relevant in healthcare transformations. We should know the products that are working or not for people and more quickly be able to sort of go to, another product, whether it's a pharma product or not. It changes the way we do clinical trials. So it has a run effect. It changes the business model that Patrick was talking about. So that's where we're headed. I think you have to do things very rigorous. I think there is trust within societies, but it's not a lot. So you have to show clinically this is, if you move from A to B, this is why it's truly successful. It's now just trying to move people to your product. But I think those clinical trials are going to come. And I think when we do those things, we'll ultimately be successful.
So this is for you. Is big data the next wonder drug? Ben or Wendy? Is big data? Ben, you start. Is big?
I look at big data as something that enables. I don't think of itself it's going to it's going to solve the problem, but it's going to help connect and help us to unlock new areas to explore. At the end of the day, we still have to understand the disease biology. We're going to have to understand the root cause of disease, and that's truly the difference, right? If you go back in the 1900s, when people presented with lung cancer, and we have a leading pulmonologist, so I hate to say anything when we have the leading people here. But by the time they presented, they were coughing up blood, right? There really isn't anything you could do. Today, we can see early lesions on a CT scan, or hopefully through some of these new circulating ctDNA models, we could even see things before that. So that's what allows us. But at the end of the day, we still have to understand the disease biology.
I think that is, in essence, the emergence of stage 0 disease. Not only do we find the early markers, but we can use genetic modalities to show who's predisposed to have it even before. Wendy?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought, that's an interesting point. So here's one of the things we look at in rare disease. 40% of rare diseases, people have facial dysmorphia. That means you could go on Facebook and diagnose people. So I think that big data, it's very exciting, but it's also, there's a lot of things to think about that we could sort of get over our skis in terms of ethical, private. I just think there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
It's another ethics is another panel, I think.
Okay.
I'm going to say,
Yes.
I think a
It's
part of it
important.
too is truly understanding behaviors.
Yeah.
One of the things we did some research on was, people worry about adherence. You actually have a product that works for the individual, but they just don't take it. And you're trying to figure out why is that. And so we studied just this very simple thing, which is what combination of physician treating a patient actually gives you a better adherence results. Is it male physician, female patient?
Interesting.
That combination. It was very interesting. It's not what you would think, but it was very interesting. And we studied that for a number of years. When we were part of Express Scripts, it was one of the things that we were targeted to study over 3 years. And the results were kind of interesting because it actually starts to inform the physician behavior as to how they're going to communicate with the patient. To kind of help to ensure that adherence, rather than chasing the patient after and figuring out, well, why didn't they take the drug? You're trying to get ahead of it, and that was purely on behavior, irrespective of product.
So the cousin of big data, I want your take on these two sinister words that come up, 2 letters, I guess, AI. We hear a lot about it. Is it something that is becoming inculcated into pharmaceutical science, or is it still sort of a fringe or a machine learning dynamic? Is it on your radar? Is it something that is transformative at its base?
So I would say it's on our radar. It's being used. I think AI of itself needs enough data to make sense out of. If the episodic nature of the data or the robustness of the data is not there to learn from. So I think there's certain use cases that have been very helpful. It will become more and more useful for us as we go forward, both in the drug discovery piece as well as in what I call the responder development piece on the far end. So we're using it. It's early days.
So I want 2 questions, and we'll kind of wrap it up. We've got a minute left. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the least and 10 is the most, I want to keep pharma in as a collective. I know it's an average, and that's problematic. I want you to pick a number where it is in terms of its innovation status in the world. And secondly, what's out there that excites you? Yesterday was the announcement of the new Apple Watch. Those of you who saw it, it's an amazing piece of technology that has the ability to look at falls, to detect atrial fibrillation. And so we're seeing an interesting shift to the consumer in that context into real data. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. What perked you up? And give me the number just for fun. You can go to anybody who has one, you can yell it right out. I don't want to put the burden on you to go first.
I'll go first.
Okay.
I'm going to say 6.
Okay.
And the thing that excites me is the thing that has always excited me, and it's not high tech. It's really the power of the pharma industry to allow people to continue to contribute to the world.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go a little higher. I'm gonna say
A little higher.
A little higher, not a lot, a little higher. A 7, and I say that because, you know, I won't do it today, but I can give you stories where lives were saved by products specifically that actually came out of Big Pharma too, by the way. But what excites me is the empowerment of people. I really think the more power gets into the individual's hands is what's going to transform this industry. So what do I mean by that? The more a person can in fact help to communicate, as simple as communicating more effectively with your physician, as simple as that, because the physicians are being chomped at the bit, get them in, get them out, and patient sits there and they walk out, they don't understand, they're confused, or they don't even agree sometimes. So the more people become empowered in their healthcare, I think that's what's going to drive and force some change. So I'm excited about that.
Good. Ben, a number and an idea.
Yeah, I probably 8.5. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think it's for two different reasons. I think one is building on what Patrick said is. I believe we're now seeing innovation happening all around the world. So beautiful stuff coming out of China and Asia where we hadn't seen a lot, where they used to be more, more fast followers or other things. We're now seeing innovation. And the second piece is, I think we know behavior is critical to a number of different diseases, and having all this data available to us, like you said, the Apple Watch, is going to get ahead of the game. So those are the two reasons, and pharma is playing in both of those.
Great. Wendy.
Well, I'm going to say 4 because I'm super optimistic. I think we can do so much better. And with all the behavior and the data and the social and the collaboration, and that we can, that we are, I just think we're going to keep going, and it's just going to get better and better.
And what is it that excites you? What is a thing out there, whether it's the Apple Watch or AI or anything, or consumer engagement, connectivity through the internet? What?
Well, I do think all those things excite me, and specifically it's the, I know you don't like this, but it's the patient infusion. I do think that having patients really as partners into the development process and thinking about their behaviors by really engaging them, that is going to help transform our ability to take care of them.
You want to guess what my number is?
10.
It's a 9.
Okay, all right.
I think we are in for a heck of a ride, and it's going to be an amazing time. We're all lucky to be alive, and we're very lucky to be here today. Thank you to my panel.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank our amazing panel for giving their time and their energy and their insights to us. What a gift. We have a few minutes, just a few, for a couple of questions and answers. Raise your hand, shout it out. We've got microphones. Georgia, we'll start with you.
So my question to the panel is the following. So what really bothers me in the current model, that where it seems from what I heard from the panel that we all recognize the fact that the external forces will actually push pharmaceutical industry to change and explore new business models. So why don't we think that transformation, maybe key to transformation might be around challenging the standard of care? Why should we be satisfied with the standard instead of going after excellence of care?
Go for it.
Well,
We shouldn't.
yeah, we shouldn't.
Right.
Like that.
We shouldn't.
Absolutely not, right?
That'll get driven by patients, and as more and more people have a voice in their own health care, that's going to change.
They want a cure. That's what they want.
You are focusing on the right thing, which is the patient. But but I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that, because this is where I think is the key. When we are going through the regulatory pathway, and the way that we're designing trials is based on the standard of care, and nobody's challenging that. No matter what patients are saying, and no matter how unsatisfied they might be.
I think that in the emergence of regenerative and restorative medicine, we will see fundamental changes, whether it's a unique stem cell mediated change where we grow a new organ, so it becomes a different dynamic. We're not treating CHF and failure in a traditional sense. We're actually making the heart anew using stem cell mediated technology. I think that standards are changing across the world, and the one interesting standard to me is the chatbot. The chatbot, and I blame Alan Turing for this, is that they say that if only the chatbot could be as good as a human. And I think that's the wrong standard, because I think that chatbots can be better than humans. I think they could have unique cognitive capabilities. They can speak in multiple languages. They can be gender 1, gender 2, gender 0. So I think you're onto something, that the standards are in a transformational flux themselves, and that's going to kind of rock us from our very core foundations.
And I was going to say, I don't think we should settle, and I think most people really aren't necessarily going to settle. But healthcare is not. It's not, or the pharmaceutical industry. It's not a fast-moving industry in terms of change and innovation. And as that progresses, I think we'll see more of that sort of forward pushing. But it takes time. And remember, it's sort of people always go U.S. and Europe. Well, you know that Europe is not one thing, so you've got, right? It is what it is. So there's a lot to change to make it work, to get to that next level. But I do see openings for progress being made at the agency, cutting some time for some of their reviewing earlier. There's some things occurring that shows signs of hope that we could be open for that.
Last thoughts?
The only thing I would just add is two thoughts. One is, it seems like what we've seen now is when we actually go to the FDA, we bring patients and patient advocates with us, which really changes the conversation, allows for different discussions than a very purely clinical discussion. That's one. And the second piece of the endpoints, while the number of primary endpoints are still very biological or disease focused, we're now bringing in a lot of patient-reported outcomes and quality of life measures that traditionally would not have been there. So you could have things that met a disease outcome, but the patient experience was not as positive. And if you don't have both of those, you don't have a very positive disease outcome and a positive patient experience, I don't think you can really transform things. So those conversations are happening, which I think is a very positive piece as we go forward.
Maybe we should just eliminate death.
Yeah.
Why not?
Question.
Hi, Alyssa. Yes.
Hi, everybody. Great panel. Thank you. I guess my question is, we talk about innovation through collaboration, but do you think your companies are investing enough in collaboration and really looking at the neurochemistry of collaboration and bringing people together across all of the elements of the company? And is there a return on collaboration that could overcome what you said, Patrick, I guess, that we're sort of tied to the P&L? And so I guess we have to ask ourselves, are we investing enough?
Well, I'm not in a pharma company, so it's probably not fair for me to answer. So it's probably
Well, obviously, we're biased. I mean, I think what we've done if you saw one of our Red Jacket honorees tonight with Melinda Richter at J&J setting up J-Labs, where we have these places all around the world. We provided a place where you can come in, no strings attached, and innovate. We help you, we support you. We give you access to a number of different resources within Johnson & Johnson to drive that. I think it's a very open and receptive model that, as Melinda mentioned, is the validation of that is the investments from the outside world into those companies. So I think the models, there are a number of different models. Obviously, we're biased to some that we've seen to be very successful. I think there's others as well that are happening. And we're biased because what we've seen is we've set up innovation centers in J-Labs. We're seeing a lot of other companies follow in those steps. So we feel like we must be doing something right, because copying is usually the biggest form of flattery.
Well, and also working for a small biotech based in Marin County, California, we are very collaborative. Everything, in fact, sometimes we talk to our CEO about, no, you don't have to share that, which is probably a little bit different. But I have to say the return on collaboration is enormous because you're really listening by really transparent and really thinking about that. You can listen to the people who are right on the front line of how do we actually make a difference.
Yeah. Well, you know, in fairness to J&J, the business model of J&J has never really been, you know, one big pharma company anyway. So
Yeah,
the
that's
construct
true.
and the structure of the business has always been on that edge. So.
Bonnie Brescia, and then Jules. We'll take the last question there. So Bonnie? Yep, right here. Oh, sorry.
Thank you all for your thoughts. I wanted to ask a question by pulling from some of the things that many of you said. I think it was Patrick who was talking recently about the point of how important the communication is between the patient and the caregiver and provider. And John, you were talking about the possibility that the chatbot could be even better than a human. And those of us who work most directly with patients know one of their biggest frustrations with today's healthcare system is how long it takes and how many chatbots they've got to get through to get to a provider. And to the extent that pharma and device, et cetera, have been working on ways in which they can reduce the amount of time that patients need to be with their providers, it begs the question for me about, well, how much of health really is about the communication and having more time in a greater relationship with caring and caregiving people?
I've seen experiments outside the United States with AI doctors that, to me, look pretty amazing. They have empathy, they have expressions, they have time to spend with the patient. You know, when you get immersed in that AI experience, when it's really good, it is immersive, and you feel like that's a person. I think there's something there.
Humanity, unfortunately, is overrated. And the physician, and I say this pretty seriously, the physician is becoming obsolete. That's the nature of the progress. The progress in science, with machine learning, with AI, with cognitive developments, is linear and it goes on and on. The human capacity is asymptotic. And I think that is the challenge of our times. That transpersonal reality is such that we have to start thinking about it. It may make you nervous, but that's a reality. And you can cling to your humanity as a baby blanket, if you wish, or you can take a bold step forward to look at new domains. When my wife comes home from the pediatrician, the first thing I say is, what did the doctor say? Soon, I'll ask, what did the computer say? And that's the nature of care, I believe.
Well, I think one of the things you're seeing also outside of the country, or I've seen, is that when we have settled standard of care, we have settled medicine, that you can then do telehealth, like in India, where you can't get to doctors,
Sure.
and you can take the burden off doctors for things that are already settled. So you can use technology to take care of the mass or the questions that need to be answered, and save the physician for the things that are really required for that personal
The promise of
interaction.
technology is to give the physician more time with the patient.
Exactly.
That's
The
the
ones that need it.
magic of
Right.
it. But the burden will also, not the burden, the responsibilities will shift, because technologies will get so sophisticated that they'll do that. So that magical endpoint of doctor-patient relationship may ultimately be held out. I tend to think not.
Jules, we'll take your final question.
Okay, so thank you. That was a stimulating panel. I have three comments. One, I sort of view ourselves, this is not about us, about as a disruptive innovation company, especially with clinical trials to get products to the market quicker and cheaper and all that stuff. But just two comments on that. I read many years ago Clayton Christensen's books, all of them, and I was told by several senior people in pharma, some of your colleagues, and I come out of Pfizer, to read the books. And I think that a lot of these discussions that we had today, you have to understand what disruptive innovation is all about, whether it's the floppy drive or whatever it is. The other thing I'd like to comment is I think you were much too harsh on pharma. And most of our market is small companies, innovative, smart people, all this kind of stuff. Okay?
I gave him a 9.
What?
I gave him a 9.
But you were verbally tough on it, that's all.
Okay.
You don't want people to agree with you, right? It's what you said.
Just driving the discussion.
So, yeah, I know, and it was very stimulating. No, and I compliment you on it, no question about it. But there is an advantage to pharma in that, number one, is they have money, they have really smart people, they have distribution. And I always used to joke, if Pfizer wanted you to go to Australia that day, your passport would be at the airport when you arrived in Australia, and your suit will be there, and you'll have a good night's sleep. And maybe you saved 10 lives, by doing it. So I think there's a balance, but I think the whole concept of disruptive innovation and what it takes time, and it's extremely frustrating. But at some point, it actually happens. And in today's world, with technology, all the things everybody talked about, it's going to happen a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And so I tend to be, like you've been, I tend to be optimistic, but you have to be realistic. So I always tell people, if your head is going to be in the clouds, you better have your feet on the ground. So if you can balance those two, I think you'll be very successful, and this is a great panel.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a great closing comment. Thank you, Jules. And thank you to the panel.